everybody. Welcome back for our next session, How Learning and Development Can Support Working Parents. If you're here, please feel free to say hi in the chat. Tell us what's on the menu for lunch. I think we're pretty much in the lunching hour for most of the U.S. here. So go ahead and pop it in the chat. Say hi, what you having for lunch, or maybe a snack. We'll go ahead and kick off here with Kortney. Kortney is graciously offered to join us this morning and or afternoon. She's dedicated to creating inclusive and supportive workplaces for parents, offering consultations and leadership trainings and resources to help leaders retain their top talent. As the host of Next Gen Work Culture podcasts, she discusses the challenges faced by working parents and strategies to help foster that positive workplace culture. So, no lunch yet. That's all right, Sydney. How many working parents or working moms and or dads or parents do we have out here in the audience? I think this is a long overdue topic about how we can support parents. You're doing double duty. I know most workplaces don't acknowledge that parenting is a full-time job, but it is. It's definitely something I think that we can all shed light on, and it'll be great to get some resources here. So, Kortney, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Sounds great. And in the chat, I shared a link to a Google Drive PDF version of the participant guide if you want to pull that up. And you can also scan the QR code on the screen right now if you'd like to get it that way. And that will have all of the information from this, plus all of the links and such. So you don't have to worry about like frantically taking notes as we go through. I've got a lot of resources packed in there to help you understand some things or some examples. So don't feel like you have to, save all of that as you go. Just get that one PDF from the link or from the QR code. And the session is recorded, so you can catch the replay. Awesome. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to start with a little story and just a super quick sort of trigger warning throughout the presentation. I am going to mention briefly pregnancy loss, fertility issues, things of that nature, just so you know. So I'm going to tell you the story of a woman who is maybe in her early 30s, late 20s. She has been trying to establish herself in her career and really be ready to start a family, and finally decides to start trying with her husband, and of course takes a million pregnancy tests over the course of a year or two, finally gets that positive result. And because of all of the stigmas around talking about pregnancy loss, she kind of suffers through all that nausea and everything in the first trimester by herself. Really only her and her husband know about the pregnancy at this point, so she comes up with those excuses at work, with friends, tells family, finally at the end of that first trimester, and then goes in and tells her manager on Monday morning, "Yay, I'm pregnant." She's so excited. And the manager is so about it and says, "Okay, great." And that's about it. She gets nothing else from work to help her understand how to apply for maternity leave, how to prepare, how to add the baby to the benefits, or anything like that. It's all a bunch of trying to navigate what in the world it's like to be pregnant, to prepare your house for a new baby, and figure out work all at the same time. Ready or not, she has the baby, becomes a new mom, and is sleep deprived, as most new moms are, is figuring out her new identity as a mom. And then about 12 weeks later, because she did get that FMLA at least, unpaid leave, she returns back to work and is expected to be just like she was before, the same employee she always was, but she has no support for being this new person. Does this sound familiar to anybody? This is basically my story in a nutshell, but it could have been pretty much anybody, any mom out there. I think that anyone who is a mom or knows someone who is a mom or a dad pretty much can relate to something in there. You you are super excited, but very overwhelmed, get pretty much no support from most organizations and managers. So real quickly, just a little bit about me. So you wonder who in the world is talking at you. First and foremost, I am mom to these two little kiddos. My son is 4 and my daughter is 2. I am wife to a park ranger. So I have the pleasure of living on a beautiful state park in Tennessee, which is a really awesome lifestyle for us. I was a music teacher for about a decade. And I taught all age levels. Actually, my last position, I taught literally K through 12 in the same school. My primary work responsibilities right now is as an instructional designer. I subcontract with several of the larger e-learning agencies, and I help leaders support working parents so that they can create a workplace culture that attracts and retains the best people. So that's really what I am all about, is helping leaders and HR people, managers really understand how to better support working parents. So I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about who I'm talking to. Where are you? What country are you in? If you're not in the US, some of this is a little different in different countries, of course, or maybe what state are you in? Because some states have paid leave, some don't. It's very different. Do you have kids? How many, if you do? How old are they? And what is your role? Are you content developer? Are you freelancer? Are you a L&D manager? So if you don't mind sharing, just in the chat.
Very strange place for a
And in true work from home parenting fashion, my son has decided to boycott nap and is staring at me from his bedroom door. So you may get to meet him soon. But hopefully he's going to go to bed. All right, so it looks like we've got mostly people in the US here, a mix of kids, a bonus mom, I love that term, instructional designers, transitioning teacher. So was I. All right. So I want to preface this by saying training can't fix everything. And I know that. I'm not here to say you need to just train away all of the problems. Kimberly, I could relate. Your son is home with you as well. And it's fun times. So I know that training can't fix everything. A lot of the problems working parents are facing are coming from poor policies, a lack of support, or benefits like paid leave. But I do feel that L&D has a place to make a difference, that we can have some influence on how supported parents feel in our organizations. I have a future-ready work culture framework that if your organization that you work for is getting really serious about wanting to develop this culture of family-friendly, parent-supportive, you could download my framework. It starts by really figuring out what is the problem? Are you losing employees left and right? Or what is happening and why. So get some data and then plan, of course. And then the third step there is rapid action. So I really feel that that's where we can make a big difference as learning and development practitioners. In the rapid action stage, I suggest that we do some leadership development, some things that will make culture changes relatively quickly. And then in the long term, you're going to have to make some bigger changes that are more system-wide, maybe, some childcare benefits or stuff like that. That's going to take a lot longer to kind of implement. But I feel that in that rapid action stage where we're really trying to kind of lay the groundwork for building up this culture, that a lot of that is going to have to do with teaching people to be more supportive. So that's where I feel that we can really make a difference. If you're interested in the full framework, you can download that with the link in the participant guide. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the challenges of working parents, which I think most of us, it sounds like we got a lot of parents here, so most of us are probably intimately familiar with these challenges. We're going to talk a lot about leadership development because that's where I feel that the biggest area for improvement is. And then a little bit about how we could train all employees, so some inclusivity training and some meaningful learning for the parents themselves. So let's look at a couple of stats. These stats are specific from the US. It came from Glassdoor, but about 40% of parents, 40% of the workforce, are parents with children under 18 in the home. And about 11% are parents with children under 5, which of course brings in a whole new layer of problems with childcare and such with the younger kids. And about 1 in 3 employees believed that having children could negatively impact their career growth. And that's really sad. Like 33% of people think having a kid and having a good career where you can grow and develop in your career are not going to work together. And unfortunately, in some cases, they're right. There is a stat sheet in the participant guide with even more stats on there that you are more than welcome to distribute and share to anyone that may be an influencer or decision maker at your organization to help convince them that, you know, we can, or that we should be supporting working parents. And if you get some, you know, negative feedback from people or pushback, remind them that pretty much everyone is going to be a caregiver at some point in your life, and everyone has needed a caregiver. We all started as babies who needed love and care and support from someone. And chances are, as we get older, as our parents, our spouses, our loved ones, our friends get older, you may find yourself in a situation where you're having to be the caregiver for someone, not necessarily a child, but for someone. So most of this impacts a very large percentage of the employees at any organization. So I wonder from you, just in the comments, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that working parents and caregivers are facing today? I see someone has mentioned that her maternity leave was only 6 weeks long. A lot of states don't have paid leave. So yeah, parental leave is one of the biggest challenges, like right off the bat, that we're kind of hit with. Our time is not in our control. Access and affordable childcare, absolutely. Childcare is a huge problem. Sick kids home from school, balancing caregiving and work responsibilities. So just trying to balance work and life. I don't think that there is really such a thing as work-life balance, but the teeter-totter is never going to be perfectly even, you know? It's always one way or the other, I feel. Special needs children come with a whole nother set of issues to deal with, yeah. I know that childcare gets even more difficult when your child has special needs. And then, of course, once they get into school, you're attending all those IEP meetings and everything, or you would like to. All right. So yeah, lots of good stuff coming in. Some of the biggest challenges, childcare, as we said, work-life balance, just being exhausted or burnt out from spending all of your time like helping someone. You're either an employee or you're having to, you know, take care of your family in the afternoon, and there seems to be very little time for yourself. Lack of flexibility from work. We're maybe feeling guilty for not being with our kids or not being the most present that we can as a parent. And then career growth becomes a problem, especially for moms. There's actually some statistics out there that say that dads tend to get promotions or have, you know, pay raises and such after they get kids, but moms are more like penalized. Not even just because we take leave and miss opportunities, but just because we're perceived to be a lesser employee. Default parenting equals rough. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's see. I am going to try to deploy a poll. What do you think was the number one driving factor for working parent satisfaction, according to a survey from Work Labs? All right, hopefully everybody has had a chance to get in there. It looks like most of us are saying team and leader support, and you would be correct. Most parents are saying that the number one thing that is going to make them happy at work is support from their team and from their leaders. So they want supportive managers and colleagues. They're looking for organizations that have a culture of respect and trust where they're not being, micromanaged constantly. They're trusted to just get their work done. And they have the space to speak up. That feels like something this feels like the culture that everyone would want at work, right? Not just parents. So again, this goes back to if you're getting pushback on trying to implement some of these things, just remind everyone that it's going to make the culture overall better for everyone. So now let's get into what I think is really the meat and potatoes of this is the training managers. How can we help our leaders understand how to empathize and support working caregivers? And Sabaya says their former manager nor their director had children, so they just didn't have any idea what these challenges were. The 40-hour work week, it's just outside of home and work and nothing else. Yeah, so really our workplace is still what was designed for our dads and grandfathers and when we still had mom staying at home most of the time. But that is not the case for almost every household now. And a lot of our leaders and managers are still of that generation where someone was staying home or they don't have kids at all. So we're going to try to train leaders to support parents during 5 stages: the family planning stage, or trying to conceive, pregnancy, parental leave, lactation, and then throughout the caregiving journey. So as the kids grow up or as you have to take care of someone else. So another poll. I'm wondering if you have heard of the PWFA and the Pump Act. And these are just in the US. So if you don't live in the US, you could just choose that to live in the US. So are you very familiar? You've heard of them, but you don't know much. You don't know anything about them, or you don't live in the US. All right, looks like a lot of us are going to learn something today. So several of us have not heard of these laws, which is not surprising to me at all. So I'm going to give you just kind of a super, super fast rundown of them because I think it's important that we understand or at least have a knowledge that they exist so that we can go out and educate the people that we work with about them as well. In the participant guide, there's a lot more resources and information and links. If you are going to try to develop a training on this or something, you can go to those links to find everything you need to know. So the PWFA stands for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act states that an employer must provide reasonable accommodations for conditions related to pregnancy. So this applies to almost all employers, and reasonable accommodations is, of course, going to differ from person to person to person, depending on their pregnancy and their needs and their job. And it's not just pregnancy, but conditions related to pregnancy. So that could include trying to conceive, fertility treatments, loss of pregnancy, giving birth. So if they don't qualify for FMLA or something like that, this law could help them. And it was meant to help pregnant workers stay in the workforce. So, of course, in the US, most women are working up to their due date or as close to it as they can. This law is meant to help them do that, not push them out. So you can't use the PWFA to force somebody to go on leave. It does require that there's some sort of a discussion between the employee and the employer. So we have to disclose your pregnancy if you're going to need any sort of accommodations. And there has to be this back and forth of some type, some kind. Maybe that's an email, maybe it's an official process or form that your company has, or maybe it's just a literal conversation. But it requires an interactive process between the pregnant employee and the employer to figure out what accommodations they need. And there is a sort of clause in there that says they don't have to give the accommodations if it would cause undue hardship for the business. But that's pretty hard to prove, especially for larger organizations. So in most cases, they are going to be required to give some sort of accommodation, not necessarily the one that the pregnant employee asks for exactly, but they have to accommodate and make it possible for them to do their job. Even with the law, it was still impossible for me to pump at work when I was teaching. Reasonable. Yeah. So Janelle, I'm curious when you were pumping at work or trying to pump as a teacher, because this law is fairly new and I ran into that problem as well. So I'll get into that in a little while. So why should we even care about accommodating pregnant people? 75% of women will become pregnant when working. Okay, yeah, Janelle. So you probably actually weren't covered by those laws in 2014 and 2018 because the Pump Act is very, very new. 41% of mothers are actually the sole or primary breadwinner. So that goes back to this being a generational thing. It's very different than it used to be. We used to have most moms staying home, right? But this isn't the 1950s anymore, and we need to catch up. 80% of women work very close to or up to their due date, which is why this law was created. So how can managers or leaders support during family planning, and what can we teach them to do? First of all, they need to understand that law. They need to know that it exists, and they need to know what is required of them. What is a reasonable accommodation? How does the woman need to let them know that they need an accommodation? They need to understand the bare minimum, at least. Let's set the bar low and at least make sure they know what they're required to do by law. They also need to understand that someone may need accommodations well before they are actually pregnant. So if someone is struggling with infertility, maybe they're having to go through those IVF treatments. We have friends who had to travel. We live in Tennessee. They had to travel all the way to Colorado for finally conceiving their child. So of course they needed some time off from work. That would have been covered under this law. If they didn't have the personal or sick time to put in, they still would have been entitled to take those days off to go and do that travel under this law. So they need to understand that accommodations don't just start once somebody is like very obviously huge and pregnant, right? They may need accommodations or help or support long before they actually are showing that they're about to have a baby. We can also help our managers understand that family planning is very stressful and time consuming for some people, especially when you're dealing with fertility issues, and encourage them to have this culture where their teammates feel safe coming to them and telling them, hey, I have a doctor's appointment next week with a fertility specialist, if they want to. But they also should respect their privacy and not force information out of them if the employee isn't wanting to share. And finally, be supportive of all paths to pregnancy or paths to being a family. Not everyone can or wants to just have a child the most normal way. Not everyone is going to go through just a pregnancy. Maybe they need a surrogacy. Maybe they're going to go through adoption, or maybe they want to be foster parents. I mean, we have friends right now who are going through the process of becoming foster parents. They have to go to a class every Tuesday night. So she had to work her schedule out so that she could be there every Tuesday evening for that class. So that's, something that could have been covered by this, and an accommodation that she may have needed in order to become a foster parent. And then how can managers and leaders support employees during pregnancy? Well, first of all, how should they react when someone shares that they are pregnant, or that maybe their significant other is expecting, or that they're starting the adoption process? A lot of times the employee is way more excited about it than the manager is, because the manager starts immediately thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to cover for them, or we're going to have to get a sub if it's a teacher, or what projects aren't going to happen, or, all these things that are going to have to be taken care of at work while they're out. So try to teach managers not to let all that stress out immediately, or to show that they're like frustrated or upset or anything over the pregnancy. They need to be excited and supportive. Again, understand the laws, what's required of them. And in our trainings, we can provide some really practical ideas for their specific work environment. So this would be like a great opportunity to do some branching scenarios or some role playing if you're in person, and talk about, your employee comes to you and says that she has gestational diabetes, and she's going to have to check her blood sugar every morning at 10 o'clock, and she might need to have a snack. But she works on the factory floor where she's, not supposed to have a break at that time and not allowed to have snacks. What are you going to do as her manager? How can you work through that and help her get an accommodation? And in some cases, that is specifically on the manager to figure out. But at some organizations, they have a more, legal process to go through, where you may have to work through HR or something like that. But you need to know what the process is. Also, this is a good opportunity to do some training on talking about sensitive topics, strategies to talk to employees, have these back and forth conversations that may be somewhat difficult. And on difficult topics, how to be supportive of pregnancy loss. And what not to say or do. So that kind of comes back to a generational thing as well. A lot of, we may be sort of appalled at what some men would say, or not just men, some older women as well. So this job aid that I'm mentioning here, let's see if it'll open for me. If you're interested, you could download this Ideas for Accommodating Pregnant Employees, or it's just an example of something you could put together for your organization. It's just giving ideas for the common problems. So if they're having problems in the morning or at any time of day with sickness, how can you, swap their duties or change their schedule? If they're having problems standing and walking, can you give them a stool? Can you give them access to an elevator? So just something like this to kind of list out the options at your organization that they can use as a job aid would be really helpful. And then how can we help managers support employees during parental leave? First of all, let's help them understand that parental leave can be an opportunity, and it shouldn't be thought of as a burden. So I mean that by, it can be a really great time to reorganize your priorities at work, to give more junior people some opportunities to step into leadership roles or to take on bigger projects. And think of it as a time to really slash unimportant, not necessary things and focus on only the highest priority, stuff that has to be done for your role. It could be a really great opportunity for the parent to restructure their role, but it's also a great opportunity for the organization to really focus on what is important. So if we can help our managers and leaders understand that it's not a burden. It really is an opportunity. That is a great first step. And then help them understand how to actually prepare employees for leave. So is that going to be the same for every employee? Do you have a very specific laid out process? Or is it going to be different depending on what, or what role they're in? It's going to be probably very different depending on level. So are they a manager or are they, entry level? But maybe a job aid, a checklist of things, or maybe like a course that they could go through together to help prepare. And just to know when should they start preparing, who do they need to involve in that process? And help managers understand how to communicate during leave. Some organizations completely cut the employee off and you're not supposed to communicate with them at all. I don't really like that approach. I think most employees would love to have their manager check in on them a week or two after the baby's born. Hey, how's it going? Show that they care about them as a parent and a family. And then how are they going to prepare for the employee's return? Do they need to send a specific email out 2 weeks before they're supposed to come back? Do they need to reach out with a phone call? Do they need to have a Zoom call? Is the employee going to come in for one day to talk through things? Are they going to need to do sort of a tour around, the whole team to check in with everyone? Is someone supposed to be in charge of keeping a running doc of things that happen on certain projects? What are they going to do as a manager to help the parents return back to work be a little smoother? Oops. All right. Do we have any questions before I go on into the Pump Act? Is there any questions or thoughts about family planning, pregnancy, or parental leave? And there's lots of links and other resources in the participant guide as well. Not seeing anything, so I'm going to move on. So the Pump Act is the other law that I asked about. The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is specifically from pregnancy and pregnancy-related issues. Lactation is included in that, but lactation has its own law now as well. The Pump Act was put into effect very recently, within the last year and a half. And it states that an employer must provide time and space for an employee to express breast milk for up to 1 year. So up to their baby's first birthday. So again, this is reasonable time and space. And anybody who has ever breastfed a baby knows that the amount of time it takes to pump is going to change drastically over the course of a year. If you go back to work at 2 weeks old, which I hope you don't have to, but lots of women are, you're going to have to be pumping way more frequently than you do when your baby is 11 months old. And it's going to depend on what kind of pump you have. Do you have a really powerful electric pump, or are you using a manual pump? Are you using the kind that's going into your bra that is just battery powered? Where is the lactation space? Do you have to travel halfway across the universe to get to it? Or is it in a closet right next to you? All of these things are going to make it very difficult to figure out exactly how much time. So that's why the law just says reasonable time. And you have to work together to figure out what is that reasonable time. And you also have to have reasonable space. In the participant guide, I shared a checklist for what has to be included in that space. It has to be free from intrusion. So preferably a locked door, but it has to be, something where everybody isn't going to need access to it while you're pumping. You have to be shielded from view. So again, preferably in a separate room, but it could just be putting up a partition. That is legal. And I see a question about the participant guide. I will snag that link for you again in just a minute, but it is way back at the top of the chat. The Space has to be free from intrusion, free from view, or shielded from view, and has to be functional for pumping. So thank you, Christy. So the functional for pumping, again, is going to depend on exactly what that person is doing. They probably are going to need an electric outlet. Most pumps, they're probably going to have to plug in. They're going to need a flat space for putting things on, for pouring milk. It also says that you have to provide space for them to store cold milk. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fridge. A separate fridge is best, but it may just be that you're allowing them to bring a cooler with them to work. But the law does apply to everyone except for flight attendants and pilots and some rail coach, like train employees. Everyone else is covered now. So someone mentioned that they struggled when they were a teacher. So did I. I just gave up with my first kid. I didn't try pumping at work because of some problems I had with my administrator, and I'll get into that in a minute. But teachers and nurses, especially, like those are two very female heavy industries. They were not really covered by the previous law, and now they are. So as of 2022, I believe, almost all female employees are covered by this law, which is, awesome. Oh, that's the other super important part. It can't be a bathroom. Bathrooms are gross. You can't require someone to pump in the bathroom. And that includes a space that is connected to the bathroom. So if you have like a foyer where it's kind of like a waiting area inside the bathroom, you can't use that as a pumping space either. A few quick facts. The WHO, or the Health Organization, recommends that babies are breastfed for at least 6 months, but only about 58% of moms are breastfeeding by 6 months old. And 60% of moms stop breastfeeding before they want to. 82% feel that pumping isn't supported in our society. And over 50% of moms didn't feel personally supported to breastfeed. And of course, that includes not feeling supported at work. But good news, the pandemic actually caused an improvement in breastfeeding success and longevity because, of course, a lot of moms were stuck at home with their babies. A lot of this disproportionately affects rural and lower socioeconomic families as well, because a lot of times those are the moms who are going back to a more like labor-intensive job where lactation really wasn't supported in the past. So those are a lot of like the target for this law was the jobs where moms were really not being able to pump before, which was mostly entry level, like, food services and stuff like that, or nurses and teachers. And I see breastfeeding is pushed until the baby is at least a year old. Most go to 2 in Central America. I think a year old is better, but they're recommending at least 6 months. And sadly, so many moms in the US just aren't even able to get to that because of the lack of support at work. And yes, everyone had access to the door. That's never good. I had to like tape a sign over the lock to my door that had a picture of a cow on it, like mom at work, and still had people walk in on me. So that's part of the free from intrusion. We have to do everything we can to try to make sure that whatever space mom is pumping in is not going to get interrupted. So like a conference room is probably not a good idea. The supply closet that everyone needs to get copy paper from is probably not a good idea. Oh gosh. Yeah, that sounds terrible, Sarah. All right, so how can we teach our managers to help be more supportive of lactation at work? First of all, they need to understand that law. A lot of people have never even heard of it. More than 50% of us here had never heard of it. So that means a lot of our managers probably haven't as well, especially if they're male, because it just doesn't pertain to them. So let's make sure that they know about it and they understand the bare minimum that they're supposed to be doing. and show them some of those facts, help them understand the importance of breastfeeding. It can lead to a healthier baby, which of course is going to lead to fewer sick days from the employee. It improves the employee retention and productivity, and just in general makes mom a much happier person usually, unless there's like a lot of problems going on. And I am absolutely not against formula. I had to use it myself. But usually breastfeeding is going to lead to a much better like mental health state for mom and much better health for the baby. It can be helpful to help managers understand the physiology of breastfeeding just a little. I mean, you don't have to like really get into it in depth, but it's good for them to understand that the mom is going to need a very consistent schedule to maintain her supply. So some people have major undersupply issues and they have to pump for 25 minutes every 3 hours, or they're not going to have enough milk for their baby. On the flip side of that, some people, like I had this problem, have major oversupply issues. And if they don't pump often enough, then they end up with too much milk in the breasts, which can lead to infections and mastitis, which is terrible. It's painful. It makes you feel like you have the flu. So that schedule is very important. You can't just skip a breastfeeding or a pumping session just because you have an important meeting or something. They also need to understand that the lactating mom's needs are going to change as her baby gets older, or if she's having any sort of issues. Like when I had mastitis, I would have to pump more frequently to help get rid of the clogs. Somebody mentioned that many buildings aren't designed with a space for women to breastfeed. You kind of have to get creative with this. So yes, the employers have to figure out a space. That could be doing a lactation pod from something like Mamava. You may have seen these in like the airports where it's just a whole standalone pod, like a phone booth almost. Or you may have to give up a manager's office for those times during the day, or you can just do something like putting up a partition around their desk, which of course is probably not the mom's favorite option, but it does work. That's where we get into the logistics. So how are the moms, especially if there's like one lactation space and multiple women or people are going to be needing that space, how are they going to set up their schedules? How are they going to communicate with one another that they're using the space and when it's available? Are you going to encourage them to just block it out on their calendars? Especially that's like for remote employees, right? If we know that I'm going to be pumping during this time, that's not a great time for me to have a meeting where you're expecting me to be on camera. So I just would block it out on my calendar. Encourage the managers to encourage their employees to do that. And again, just the importance of support from their manager. A manager can really completely make or break somebody's breastfeeding journey. With my first son, he was born about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit the country, which was fun times. And I had to go back to work. I was a teacher at the time. I had to go back to work, but only sort of. It was that weird time where we were like teaching remotely. And I'm in a super rural area. So this is going to probably sound crazy to anyone that doesn't live in the middle of nowhere. But we were actually expected to go to the building once a week to help prepare lunches and breakfasts, like meals, and to print paper packets to deliver to the students because most of them didn't have internet access. So I was having to go into work once a week. My baby was only like 3 or 4 weeks old. I was still pumping. When we prepared all that stuff, then it was being delivered to the students on bus routes. So I had to sign up or had to go on a certain number of bus routes to help deliver things. And I asked my administrator if I could be put on the shorter bus routes because some of them were like almost 3 hours long by the time you got to the school, got on the bus, and then got back to the school. And that was just not like I couldn't go 3 hours without pumping because I would get mastitis. I had it like 5 or 6 times with my son. So I asked to be put on the shorter bus routes. I'm like, will you please just assign me to the ones that are less than an hour long? And she wouldn't. She's like, well, you could trade with somebody if you could find someone to trade. And I mean, she had kids. She was a mom, and she was still so like dismissive of my needs. And I knew that when I went back in the fall, we were going back to full-time in person. My baby was, I think, like 7 months old. I didn't even try pumping at work after that experience with her in the spring semester. I was like, there's no way she's going to be supportive of helping me figure out my schedule. I was a band director, had after school stuff. I had a crammed packed day. So I didn't even try. I gave up on pumping during the day, all because of my administrator. So help your managers understand that, it's super important for them to be supportive. And yes, I see that Ingrid is again appalled at me going back to work at only about 4 weeks postpartum. Yeah, it's very common over here. I was supposed to have 12 weeks off, but when the pandemic hit, all my sub plans went out the window and things changed. So I do have an example that you can share or that you can look at. This is a RISE course that I put together real quickly that you could give to managers, something similar to this, just to help them understand the law, what they have to do. So you can see here, there's like a pumping space with hotspots to help them understand all of the things that have to be included. So putting together something like this for your managers to help them understand, I think would be, a really impactful way for us to make a difference. So the final topic on leadership development is how can we be supportive throughout caregiving, not just in the infancy stages, but, as the kids grow up or when you're taking care of someone other than just a baby. This is really just general, like, be a good person, but we'll get into the specifics. Have very open communication, be flexible and understanding. Don't shame parents for their family life. Another story about my super unsupportive principal. She called me out in the middle of a faculty meeting in front of all of the school faculty for my kids being sick and me taking too much time off to be with them, and used me as an example of someone who should be finding someone else to take care of my kids when they were sick. Like, don't do that. Leaders shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. Wow. Absolutely. It was ridiculous. So parents should be allowed and should be like celebrated for raising the next generation, right? Not put down and shamed for it. We were talking about this right before we actually started the session. Avoid those like back in my day comparisons, especially a lot of, if you have older, especially men, but just the older generation in general, we may have a lot of, well, back when I was having kids, I didn't get a paternity leave. That wasn't a thing. Or, well, I missed every one of my kids' soccer games because I was working late. Like, that's not good. Why are we celebrating that? We shouldn't be comparing our family in general, like how we raised our kids, to anyone else's, because everyone has the right to do it their way. And in general, just be interested in their family. Ask, at the beginning of a team meeting, how was the ball game this weekend? How did the dance recital go? Or, oh, did the birthday party go great? To like be interested in them as human beings, not just as an employee. And just a note there that most of this applies to caregiving in general, not just parenting. All right. So like I said, that was kind of the bread and butter. I really think that where we have the most like opportunity for impact is through leadership training. I'm going to fly through what you could do to teach like all employees and a few ideas specifically for the parents, because we're almost out of time. So how can we make it a more inclusive environment? Teach all employees to be understanding, compassionate, helpful, not judge, don't compare. I mean, that sounds like every DEI training, basically, right? This is sort of a DEI topic. Let's just foster this inclusive environment. So some accommodations, especially like taking time to pump or getting extra time off work for going to prenatal appointments may seem very unfair to employees who have never gone through that. So educate about the needs, about the accommodations, about the laws. Communicate your company policies so that everyone understands. Normalize talking about breastfeeding and pregnancy and parenting. Like I said, put your pumping on your calendar. That's, everyone in your organization can see I'm making milk for my baby. Like, don't hide it, and encourage that at work. And you've heard the term, it takes a village. Let's encourage being really supportive of one another and not putting each other down. Being a parent doesn't make someone a less than employee. It doesn't make them less productive or worse at their job. Let's be supportive of them when they need it. There's a stat that says moms of 2 kids are some of the most productive people, I think that's really interesting. So finally, what can we do to help the parents themselves? Not teaching leaders or teaching anyone else, but what kind of learning materials can we make or create or provide for actual working parents themselves? First of all, help them understand their benefits. We all sign up for it when we become an employee, but may not remember things like mental health or fertility or stuff like that wasn't really applicable to us when we signed up. So help them understand their benefits. In the US, too, this is a big thing that most people don't understand. If your company doesn't provide paid leave, a lot of it, or most people, are going to need to have short-term disability insurance in order to get any sort of payment during leave. And that was something I didn't realize. So I got pregnant and then I went to sign up for short-term disability and they're like, no, you're already pregnant, so you won't qualify. It would have been really great if somebody had told me I needed that before I started trying to conceive, right? So help them understand their family benefits, FMLA, all of that stuff, the laws, how to apply for parental leave when it comes time, how to add a child to their insurance, things like that. Help them understand their rights under the PUMP Act, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, the FMLA, and the escalation steps within your company if the manager isn't complying. Do you want them to go straight to filing a lawsuit? Probably not. They can, but you probably don't want them to do that. There's probably a few people in there you want them to try to talk to first. So help your parents understand who should they go to if their manager is being a pain in the butt. Help them prepare for leave. So you could show them. So I have another sample RISE course I put together. You may have something like this to help them prepare for leave that has a welcome message saying we're so excited for you, and then what they're eligible for, how to request the leave, links to HR, what their healthcare family benefits are. All of this stuff would be, needs to be together somewhere where you could just quickly share it with them and send it to them. And you have a link to this example in your participant guide as well. And then a couple of last notes: communication. So tell them they have to be open with their manager, especially, a lot of women don't like to disclose that they're pregnant before 13, 14, 15 weeks. But if they need some sort of accommodation at work, they're going to have that open communication with their manager at least. So help them understand that, help them, give them some scenarios for practicing having difficult conversations before they get into the actual conversation. And then have some support systems in place, like maybe ERGs for parents or employee resource groups, a dedicated communication channel, like on your Slack or your Teams or whatever. Have a channel just for parents, and use those that like ERG or that group for parents as a great opportunity to bring in experts, like bring in a sleep consultant to do a presentation for them, or a behavioral specialist, or someone who can speak about being in the sandwich generation, so having to take care of kids and aging parents at the same time. Use that platform for doing some education just for the parents. Yeah, conceiving is grouped under difficult conversations. It is the reality, though. A lot of people are just get all weirded out by talking about breastfeeding or anything like that. Like, it's just normal. And finally, their access to classes or experts. So I know a sleep consultant that worked with a company. She gave all of the employees access to her sleep course for infants or toddlers or children, whatever age their kid was. And their employer gave them 30 minutes every day to take that course, that sleep course. It had nothing to do with work. It was just about parenting, but they got to take that course at work, and it actually increased their productivity because they were getting better sleep by the end of it. So they lost a little bit of work time, but increased productivity as a result. So trying to, not just think about how can we help them navigate work, but can we give them educational opportunities about being a parent at work that's going to make them a better and more productive employee. All right, I'm done talking at you. I know that was a lot. So does anybody have any questions or thoughts before we wrap up?
I think this was a powerful reframe, and I love that so many people are here. I just want to advocate for people in the workplace, because I think it definitely is very powerful when you see something that happens. Maybe it's not your problem, but your voice makes a difference, and it matters when you can help stand in solidarity with the person that needs your help. Because that's
absolutely.
how all these loud voices are going to change the paradigm. So when all these kiddos grow up, they won't have to fight these battles. So,
right. I say it. I don't want my daughter to be going into the workplace that was designed for my grandfather.
Right. I completely agree with that. You need to empower the future generation.
Right.
If nobody has questions, that's okay. Kortney will actually be hanging out at a table here.
Yeah.
If you want to continue the conversation.
And someone asked about those RISE course links. All of the links and everything that I shared is in that participant guide. So yeah, the link is there. So we're buried.
Circling back to the question, does the employer have responsibility to help find coverage for an employee who needs to step away? I believe you answered that. They do have that responsibility. Is that correct?
Yes. So they do need to help with that. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
And if you find my podcast, Next Gen Work Culture, and don't mean this to be like a plug for me or anything, but I recently interviewed a lawyer who specializes in like the PUMP Act and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So if you go back to my podcast and look about 3 episodes ago, you can find her contact information as well. And if you have any specific questions, she is a great resource to ask about the law. And I'm always happy to help as well. But I mean, if you want a lawyer who is also currently pregnant with twins and really cares about this.
Sometimes you need to know how the law will protect you so that you are ready to go if you need. If no one wants to pull that, but if you need to, there's other advocates out there. Let's see. I'm just going to circle back here and see if we had any more questions or comments in the chat. It doesn't look like it. So, definitely give Kortney another round of applause. This was so informative. I learned tons of new things, and I hope you did too. I have a couple of general housekeeping announcements. The first one is Kortney will be at a table immediately following the session, so please join her if you've got some time. And then for those of you who are just joining for this session, unfortunately, Bella, who is going to host our 12 o'clock session, is not able to. So we have canceled that session. So the next one up and coming will be at 2 p.m. Pacific time. And that one will be on the future of work. So join us if you can. If not, definitely there'll be a recording for you later so you can catch the replay. But I appreciate all of you taking some time out of your day to join us today, and hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.